Evan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chris. Appreciate
So,
it.
so can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So currently, I'm founding CEO of Deep Tempo. I'm a longtime founder, a technologist who builds companies primarily to help big enterprise, telco, national government, those sorts of folks. And over the last few years, it's been cyber with a little bit of fraud, anti-fraud mixed in.
And so, how did you get into cyber?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I was at that point in life where I knew I could do another company. And I was looking for what should be the mission and brainstorming with my, I think she's amazing, my daughter, and on approaches. And at first it was, what can you do about the climate, Dad? And kind of struck out on that one and not sure that my expertise fits. But what can you do about this kind of digital commons thing and how it's getting attacked? That one struck close to home, given my background, and so decided to focus on cyber. I did have a company in cyber in the past. That's now a big open source project called Stackstorm. So I had some. Again, it was a close to the strike zone.
Nice. And before we get too deep into our discussion today, I like to ask my guests that are in cybersecurity, counter fraud, counter scam, uh,
Yeah.
a story of have you ever been a victim in one of those fields? Because if you and I can't get it right 100% of the time, the audience shouldn't feel ashamed or embarrassed if they can't get it right 100% of the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this story is of somebody I know. So, knock on wood, this didn't happen to me. But the long story short, a pretty senior position person and their home router, right, was hacked. And the way it happened is somebody basically pretended to be support for that cable company and they were able to also intercept the email being sent, the reset email to their AOL account. And it did make the news. That person was the head of the CIA at the time. So
Oh,
it does happen to everybody. It has happened repeatedly to folks who really do know better, but we're all vulnerable one way or the other.
and it's particularly challenging. I assume I'm not too familiar with the story, but I assume it was he was not just a random target, but he was spearfished effectively.
He was effectively spearphished. It was, yeah, it was a campaign of folks. It was actually more like hacktivists, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I think the particular attacker may have been a teenager, but of course, similar things are happening with even more efficacy today.
Yeah.
When as opposed to you having to somehow change your voice, you can yeah, why not use your voice, right? If you're an attacker or literally spawn an alias that sounds just like the person whose yeah systems you're trying to get into. So it's gotten worse and more likely, unfortunately, in lots of ways.
It is a very, very tough world that we live in on this digital front.
Yeah, it really is. And we're privileged enough to be brought in, as relatively at Deep Tempo, relatively young company, but we're in some environments where very smart people have worked their entire career to protect themselves and their environments from advanced attacks, and they've fallen behind, and they have been successfully attacked. So, unfortunately, at least as I see it, the cybersecurity market is on the whole despite, let's say, $250 billion of spending a year, on the whole, we're losing. The attackers are making trillions of dollars a year these days.
And so, when you're talking about $250 billion, are the attackers spending the equivalent, or do they have some advantages, capital wise, or
Uh, yeah,
outside of capital?
I mean it's kind of fun from Silicon Valley. I was at this event yesterday, and somebody asked that question, like, "Why are the attackers winning?" And like, well, they are better funded. Like, what? What do you mean they're better funded? They have like VCs? Like, well, no, but if you're making trillions of dollars a year in ransomware and other payments, then surely some of that goes into systems and into your team. And of course, a lot of these teams are from well, they're not in high cost Silicon Valley often, and so they're able to get really good teams who are professionalizing attacking. They're able to set up environments like, hey, what's a very common firewall? Okay, let's make sure we get copies of that firewall. Let's set up an AI powered lab and let's simulate attacks that circumvent that firewall. So they're smart, professional, motivated, and on the whole well funded, unless they're spending all the money on boats or something like that,
or drugs
or drugs. Yeah, yeah,
other
exactly.
illicit behaviors would not surprise me.
Correct. Yeah.
And so when you're kind of in a company and you're trying to provide a threat against a, oh gosh, I hate to say it, like a vastly superior army, so to speak, what in the world do you do?
It's a great question. I think there's sort of two classes of approaches, and I'm old enough that I think I get to be cynical. I don't know, but so just bear with me here. But two classes of approaches. One is you do the check boxes, and you just do what, and I call that kind of CYA, or you might call it compliance centric approach to security, which is to say you've taken steps and you have checked the boxes. And if it happens, A, maybe you've already moved on to another job. B, you can at least say, hey, on my watch, we bought all the expensive, correct products. We went to the right training. I don't know how this could have happened. The other approach, but as there are a class of course, users, and I think maybe all of us fall into this, we can't just check the box. We have to think it through or understand it from kind of first principles. And so there yeah, there what's going on is something called threat informed defense, where the surface area of today's enterprise is vast and
Yeah.
getting bigger, right? And so it's almost impossible to put thumbs in every hole in every dike, right? But what you might be able to do is learn what the attackers are doing, anticipate that, and behave accordingly. So, marshal your forces to put, I don't know, lots of thumbs and lots of holes in this particular dike because you're pretty sure that's where the water is coming from. So it's impressive. Once you kind of go behind the scenes, it's not as if the big enterprises, at least in the US and Europe, are standing there or just checking the boxes. A lot of them are being really creative in trying to figure out where attacks might come from so they can anticipate. But they're having to refactor their security stack. They're having to move away, in many cases, from traditional prior generation security systems and take a data centric approach and really think creatively about, again, it's called threat informed defense.
And so, when you're the defender, how do you learn about what the latest attacks are? Other than by going, "Hey, what was that?"
Yes. So this is where it gets really fascinating for me, and at Deep Tempo we don't necessarily do this per se, but so I'm not. It's not at all a salesy thing, but just they being the defenders at scale do all manner of stuff. So one thing is there are systems out there that are monitoring interesting web addresses and then trying to draw the provenance, like who set up those web addresses, and trying to get back to attribution, like
Mhm.
who are these potential attackers, and keeping a real eye on them. Some of that is government, but some of it is big enterprise, and some of it is so-called threat intel vendors. So that's part of what they do. But a good example, I know a couple of large enterprises in the US that you and your listeners probably have heard of honeypots, right?
Yeah.
Where you dangle a website out there or something and see if somebody attacks it, and based on that you learn how do they attack. So there's the next generation, if you will, of honeypot is sometimes called a sock puppet, which is we're talking about how for fraud and cyber, people might call you, with your unfortunately your daughter's voice, and okay. So how do you honeypot that kind of behavior? Well, an example is they will have fake employees with
Yeah.
employee records, LinkedIn, the whole thing, right? So you create a persona of a fake person, see them get attacked, and then yeah, now you're starting to see the footprints of the attacker. So it's a pretty fascinating. It really is a pretty fascinating area.
I had a friend who, like you're talking about fake employees, had a friend
Yeah,
who worked for a company that was one of those companies where lots of people wanted to work for the company. And so people would do kind of weird things to try to get in front of the HR person. And
right.
so they had a public facing fake HR persona.
Ah,
And so anytime if someone, because people would, you dial into the phone system, you you go sideways and you get to someone else, say, I was really trying to get a hold of, I was really trying to get a hold of Evan in HR. Can you transfer me over to Evan? Well,
right.
everybody in the company knows that there is no Evan in HR. And if
Nice.
anyone ever asks for Evan in HR, you know that they're lying.
Right. Right. That's perfect. So it's those sorts of activities, and then yeah, there's others, but there is a lot of creativity, and yet again, on the whole, at an aggregate level, we're probably quote unquote losing. Yeah.
So, what kind of things do we need to do to, what are the lessons that we can learn to get us back to a place where the adversary uh, doesn't have the winning hand at the time being?
I mean, a lot of it is what one thought, and this is true in anti-fraud and in cyber, is to think about how to increase the cost of attack. So it's not necessarily about make it impossible.
Mm-hmm.
That's a high bar, but make it such that they will need to, the ROI, if you will be upside down. So it begins with all the we've all gotten the training and the ads and
Yeah.
all of that, but locking down your home router, shifting from your whatever your mother's maiden name, to multi-factor authentication, doing these things. They protect yourself, but they also prevent your system from being used for subsequent attacks. And just this year, this is based on CrowdStrike data, Cloudflare data. It doesn't really matter, but the denial of service attacks from U.S. compromised routers is up like 350%,
Oh,
right? So it's tough. So now you're an enterprise, you're getting the receiving fire. Who are those people are attacking us? It's John Smith, in San Mateo or whatever. It's my neighbor here. Why? Because we've been compromised. And I will say, without disclosing anything, but there have been public reports about this as well. There's a good amount of FUD about fear, uncertainty, doubt,
yeah.
maybe hyperbole about TP-Link, to name a name, Chinese home routers. But there is some real evidence that they are more susceptible to
Mm-hmm.
being used as well by attackers. So it's probably worth, when you're on Amazon, upgrading your home router to maybe pay a few bucks more, just so you can sleep better at night and know you're slightly less likely to be used as a pawn in this bigger game.
I mean, to me, that's really a horrific challenge for corporate America and consumer America, that the devices that are easily commercially available for residential services, the devices that are provided to us by our cable companies,
Yeah,
are just kind of, the manufacturer says, okay, we're going to build this, we're going to ship it, and if we discover that there's that 2 years down the line that there's a security hole, oh well, we're not making that router anymore.
yeah,
So you've got like corporate America, who's now the victim of all these compromised routers. Uh,
right.
residential and consumer America, who, my parents aren't going to know. Hey, you got to keep the firmware
Likewise.
on your router updated. Like, how do I even what even is firmware? Let alone how do I keep it updated? And does the manufacturer even supply updates? It's
Right. Yeah,
a bit of a
it is.
challenge of kind of knowing there's multiple people that have to play have to have responsibility.
Absolutely. Yeah. But if we all do a little bit more, it gets a little bit harder for them. So, again, the wall they have to get over is that much higher. And that's great. I think it helps. On the enterprise side, so there's a lot of evidence that attackers are now also using, as I alluded to before, AI
Yep.
to morph. I mean, why wouldn't you? You'd vibe code,
Yep.
better attacks, and then you'd probably build a simulation environment where you kind of know what the defenses of target A or B might be, right? So this is one reason, by the way, that security professionals often on their LinkedIn are missing because they don't. Why would I tell you all my experience? Now
Yeah.
you know probably what I'm using to defend Enterprise X. So now you train your system to get around what I'm using. So you got to kind of obscure your background, but then there are approaches to use AI in creative ways as well to be able to really see even very advanced attacks, and that's of course what I'm spending my life on. But that sort of approach is promising. But you got to decide: are you a checkbox
Yeah.
CYA person, or are you no? From first principles, we're going to get the data. We're going to take the right actions to prevent, to respond, to detect, and to respond. If you refactor from first principles, you will drive up the cost of an attack massively, and that's what we see happening among some of these organizations that you might imagine. Right? We all know about.
Yeah. So you're talking AI, and I couldn't help but think back to honeypots and sock puppets. Are
Right.
there kind of defensive AI sock puppets that look at the attacks and say, okay, how can I make this more expensive for this person to try to figure out my fake surface?
Yes, and yes, indeed. One approach is to actually come up with super high fidelity understanding that is adaptive of actually just what's normal.
Mm-hmm.
If you can really understand the surface of the ocean, if you will, and then be able to distinguish, is that a submarine or a whale or just a wave popping out of it, you've got a good shot at, and models are good. You give them normal data. There's a lot of normal data.
Yeah.
There's a massive amounts. So you can build models that get really, really good at so-called advanced anomaly detection, and that's a somewhat state-of-the-art approach. Um, you can also do things like which you see companies like Wiz, which is now about to be part of Google and I don't know, $30+ billion acquisition. They're doing something where they're looking at threat informed defense. So basically, unfortunately, there's ever more vulnerabilities
Yeah.
and so at any enterprise, you're like, cool. We have more vulnerabilities than we have time and people to patch them.
Yeah.
What do we do? So, there's some AI that you can use to help you prioritize which ones to go fix. And then there's now AI to like fix them. Or at some point, you need a human in the loop.
Yeah.
And of course, this all has to be locked down because even from what I've just said, those are attack vectors big time, right? So security companies getting attacked is a thing. And some of them, of course, caused problems in the global economy over the last few years. So you have to be very, very security conscious. But it is promising, some of what's happening today.
I mean, that is one of the, I suspect companies that provide security infrastructure really have to have their own really good security infrastructure, because if I can compromise your security infrastructure, I now get access to all of your customers, all their platforms through you.
Yes. Or as a startup, which is obviously or and there are these architectures where even if you get attacked, you can't become a security. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, SaaS, right, which is kind of what you're referring to, where the customers send you their data, and you have also data about their environment, and that's you have to be really trusted, right?
Yeah.
So, but another approach, which is to basically, put the intelligence in the customer environment, let it run, and not bring back anything that needs to be secured. And so that's a pattern that we're seeing, but you got to think about it from first principles again. But yeah, because if you are pulling proprietary data back, or being given the keys to the kingdom, there you can be an attack vector. So got to be really smart about it.
Gotcha. So, like in comparing like cybersecurity to fraud, are there parallels that we can draw and lessons that we can learn to apply back to each other?
Well, yes, the question back to you would be like, at what level? I mean, certainly from the tech standpoint, like what folks like we do, or we know what the Stripe, as an example, what are they doing? They are building these models to see what's normal, to be able to flag what's anomalous very quickly. And so
Yeah.
the Overwatch use case is in the technology is very, very similar. And But then from an individual standpoint, I mean, often the same thing that will be used for fraud can be used to get into your system, or to try to get and there's, red teams use very similar techniques. So if you are, or if you're hired by an enterprise to try to see if you can get into that enterprise, you will do social phishing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a social phishing is what you use also to get into somebody's bank account, let's say. Or so you do something similar to try to, get through the door into the lobby of an enterprise, and, somehow get to a USB and exploit the environment. So it's tricky from that standpoint, because again, AI is being used also just to research the targets,
Yeah.
right? Give me the top 1,000 folks who, I mean, for me, historically on my LinkedIn, I mentioned, I don't know, I'm a Georgia Bulldog fan, right? So if somebody shows up, they're a Bulldog fan, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
and they build social trust with me, and so on. I guess I should make sure to ask them specific things about where were you, but it's that sort of thing. You've got to trust but verify, for sure, to defend yourself from either fraud or phishing.
Yeah. So with like I know with the fraud rings, they've often kind of gotten pretty decentralized, and it's not one crime entity that's doing everything from the phone call to transporting money out of the country, but we've got this group of people that we're loosely affiliated with, that these are the couriers that move the money from one bank account to another bank account. These are the guys who get the consumer to give up access to their bank accounts. These are the guys that get money out of the country. Is there that sort of thing going on in cyber? And if you can disable or kind of, fight against one little piece of the organization, does it take out the whole organization?
Um, Yes, something very similar is apparently happening in cyber, and so you do see, for example, you can buy an exploit for a particular enterprise.
Yeah.
So here's a front door, okay, or back door, actually, or I don't know, and so cool. But then they will sometimes then sell. What will happen is qualified attacker will get in, will maybe leave a backdoor for themselves, and then sell access to a ransomware organization.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you have this professionalization, often not the same organization. I mean, but you're touching on something which I don't know if it's, but there is a policy debate at times in the U.S. about whether a certain class of enterprises should be allowed to hack back,
Yeah.
because it turns out a lot of the environments of these cyber criminals, like you can find them on the dark web, they have exploits too. I mean, the
Yeah.
vulnerabilities too. So you could probably, there's a web server. Well, why couldn't we take down that web server? It's illegal for the U.S. Enterprises to hack back in that way, but there is some thought that is this the take the gloves off kind of moment in the U.S.? There's a lot of it's beyond my pay grade to figure that one out. It's a big policy debate,
Yeah,
but it's pretty interesting to think about.
I've definitely seen news stories of instances where let's say the government entity is the lead on it, and they work with a Microsoft. Let's say maybe it's not Microsoft, and they've identified, hey, there's these 100,000 machines that have been compromised. Because they've been compromised, we can go in and patch them. And
Right,
so it's, hey, we're just going to go in and patch people's machines for them.
right.
It's like it'd be like I'm torn by whether or not we should be doing that or not. Well, clearly, if we do it, we reduce attack vectors, but we don't have permission to go onto this person's machine. They didn't
Right.
authorize us. So what it is kind of this weird gray area. And then even more so when you say, hey, let's take the fight to the adversary.
Yes. And that well, an adversary that we bump into, that of course is in the news a lot, is out of China, or has
Mm-hmm.
some set of adversaries, and there something I hadn't really thought about, but I suppose it's pretty obvious. But the Great Firewall, this approach to censorship
Yeah.
and to really limiting the free flow of information in and out of some of these regimes. Well, that also makes it harder to hack back, or to really, even if you're not hacking back, if you to really try to ascertain provenance or attribution of the attacker. Why? Because the that firewall is basically looking at all can't be looking at all the packets. We're looking at the packets coming and going, and that can include, like, there's a lot of stuff coming out of Langley. I mean, it wouldn't be that
Yeah.
obvious, but but you get the idea, right? Why is somebody port scanning this potential attacker within China? So my point being that because we have a much more open internet than other parts of the world, we're just more susceptible, and the government doesn't have an as obvious of a break point where they can actually see everything coming and going, which makes it tricky.
Do network providers? This will be a touchy question. Do network providers, do you think, have an obligation to do preventative network stuff? In terms of, like, let's put it down on, hey, I'm cable provider A,
Yep.
and it's easy enough for me to see all my customers being port scanned. It's easy for me to know what should or should, in theory, what should or should not be happening on residential computers.
Right.
Should I, as part of the service that I offer, act like a firewall? Should I actively be aware that, gee, this customer's computer is clearly compromised? Do I have an obligation as a network provider to do something about it?
Um, I mean, I would like to think so. That said, it is tough, and so yeah. On the one hand, we can say, like, they do have the ground truth. They do have the data coming in. They have metadata. They don't necessarily have your voice
Yeah.
call, but they have information about it. So, and with that, I can tell you very much firsthand, you can find attacks. That said, we're talking almost unimaginable quantities of data that they
Yeah.
have to sift through. B, the ways in which their customers break their devices is hard to, right, and they're not the network providers devices. So
Yeah.
we can do stuff that is shocking, or at least unexpected, and then C, they are for sure an obvious attack vector for nation states, right?
Yeah.
So they're in the crosshairs. They have the data, and their customers are doing crazy stuff. And so it's a very challenging problem. So one model we've seen is them starting to offer, yeah, would you like to, it's a little more beyond the, like, last password or that
Yeah.
those sorts of things. But would you like us to, or we've noticed something strange, right? And then sometimes even offering kind of a platinum level protection.
Yeah.
And that's one option. But I have tremendous empathy for them, having seen the sheer amount of data systems that they bought
Yeah.
just to retain the data about what we're all doing online. It's fast and hard to handle, but I'd like to think they'd step forward a little more.
And I guess it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because if I ever got a phone call from someone claiming to be from my internet service provider saying,
Yep.
"Hey, one of your computers is compromised," the first thing I do is just hang up on the phone call because
Right.
I don't trust you. Why would I trust that phone call? Because that phone call usually leads to a compromised computer, not the other way around.
Right. And I, yeah, actually wish more people had that instinct, but yes, 100%. Yeah.
And it's all of those things are just super super challenging for organizations. Do you see a direction or a time coming where the tide can be shifted, and how would that come about?
Right. I do. I think it's going to come about through, I mean, at some level, what we talk about is like the OODA loop, not to geek out a little bit, but it's this, well, how fast, I remember, I have a dark memory, but I remember when 9/11 happened and, General Powell got up there and said, we're going to get inside the OODA loop, and kind of like reassuring. And of course, I think, everyone was looking up like, what is an OODA loop? But it's basically, the speed at which it's observe, orient, decide, act. So if we can, and some enterprises, some government entities for sure are building these loops where they can see an attack starting to emerge, adjust their defenses. If they do penetrate, see it very quickly before an exploit happens, and then really learn from that so that they are even better prepared for the next one. And potentially, I was in a meeting yesterday with two big fail banks, right? And what they're trialing is a federated learning approach. So
Mm-hmm.
now you have safe ways to share information. And there is some of this happening pre-AI, right?
Yeah.
More manual and just, sending data back and forth. But now sharing the intelligence amongst models to tighten that loop. And that is, I mean, that's what I'm working on day to day. So I think that's part of the solution. I think a lot of it is what we've talked about, which is hygiene at some
Yeah.
level, and just constantly updating that and upping that. And a lot of it is somewhat generational in security. So having more technical, data centric buyers of cyber
Mm-hmm.
systems, they naturally want to see, like, show me it working as opposed to, oh, it checks this box. I'm
Yeah.
good. I can go home at night. So there's a bunch of things happening, and so and I think there's an awareness of the problem. So there's nothing we can't do if we
Yeah.
set our minds to it. So yeah, we will get there, but it'll probably get worse first before it gets better.
Is there I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this in a way that makes sense. So Cloudflare works to protect, I'll give a little, my little rant, or not a rant, but Cloudflare works to protect a whole bunch of websites and millions of websites around the world, maybe billions, I don't
Right.
know. And part of the reason why they can be effective is because they have so many customers. Is once you get a particular sufficiently large data set, it's
Yep.
easier to start seeing, hey, we saw this anomalous pattern over here, so we can learn from it and it not impact something over here. Is that kind of the same? The opposite of that is one of the challenges within the cybersecurity space, is that there's so many vendors, so many platforms, and if they're not working together, well, we saw this and we're going to keep it to ourselves to protect our customers and not spill our secret sauce.
Yeah.
But now,
Thousand.
because of that, this other vendor doesn't catch that issue.
And it's even worse than that. So I think the average number of cybersecurity vendors for a mid to large enterprise in the US is like 55,
Ooh.
something. That's okay. And traditionally, these have all been vertical stack companies. So this is this notion of the Franken stack. So it's
Mm-hmm.
basically, oh, you want us to help protect from that kind of attack? Great. Put an agent on the system, we're control the wiring, the format of the data coming back. We have a place to store the data to make sense out of the data, and we'll present it back to you.
Yeah.
This is what we found. And so then you end up with like dozens of these. And they're not actually saying, oh, wait a minute, you saw that over there. I'm seeing this over here. And you're reinventing the wheel. So the shift, and one reason I have hope is companies like Snowflake, but it was a partner of ours at Deep Tempo, but others that do these data lakes are in the ascendancy in the enterprise. So
Mhm.
we've now got enterprises saying, yeah, 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 security vendor, but all the data will go into one place, and we will ask questions of the data as opposed to putting thousands, tens of thousands of alerts in front of a human and asking them to be a correlation engine all the way up
Mhm.
there or some existing rules-based system. So that's so yeah, it is it's a data sharing issue amongst enterprises, but also very, very much so within enterprises, for better and worse.
Ah, it's it's kind of like, well, if we could all just get along, we could do better, but we're competitors, so we maybe we can't. But
Yeah,
and it's a challenge.
certainly.
Like, and no one wants to be no one wants to be the guy who says, I'm willing to go away so that others can be better.
Right. No, exactly. And these systems have built themselves in a way so that your careers often feel tied to. So, why use like a normal query language,
Mhm.
just basically how you ask questions of the underlying system. No, I'll come up with my own. So now you, as a user of me, like you have, the skill set. I know how to use this product. So you're kind of, when renewals come up, should we continue to use that or buy something else? Well, I know how to use this one, and thankfully, that's another area where AI may be helping. It's
Mhm.
basically you have these agents that just ask questions of the underlying systems, and they can help unify at that level. So we've got to unify at the data layer, but also we're starting to have agents that can kind of ask questions across systems. But the silos, one way or the other, cannot stand. We've got to share the info, the intel within orgs and amongst orgs for sure.
Are there in the cybersecurity vendor space, are there organizations or groups of organizations that are starting to come together to do that?
There's actually an enormous amount of sharing that happens. It's on the one hand a very traditional, you know, um, industry where a lot of decisions are made top down. But on the other hand, there's things like DevCon, which we just
Mm-hmm.
attended in Las Vegas, which is very open source focused, and it's just enormous number of practitioners talking about what works and kind of bragging about what works, right?
Of course.
And from that, there's a lot of really interesting tooling out there that's open source. And then shout out to a company that has been it's a nonprofit that's been around since I think World War II, which is MIT. MITRE is what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically associated with MIT, but MITRE is an unbelievable source of knowledge about what's occurring out there. They do get some funding from the US government, but also private entities. And so they've, for example, classified all yeah, I don't know. I'm quoting that, air quoting, but a vast majority of attacks that have been seen have been classified into the schema called the MITRE attack schema, and it's totally open source, totally free for a developer or an enterprise to use. So there's a good amount of sharing of knowledge that is occurring, but when it comes to the actual sharing the data that makes a model smarter in near real time to tighten that OODA loop. So if we're moving at, let's update the website so then next week someone can read the website.
Yeah.
That's a little slow versus the attackers using AI to morph their attacks. So that's the challenge is how to take that great basis of open source information and practices embedded in systems that can act closer to real time.
It seems like anyone who has a job in cybersecurity has a very safe career path for at least the next 10 years.
I think so. I think that's very true. There is a lot of fear around the LLMs agents, taking like level one
Yeah.
security, but there is an infinite amount that has to be done. And I think everyone's productivity is booming at the same time that the lower level tasks are being automated.
And ultimately that probably results in people doing, if you take my the frontline work away from me, and now I can do tier two support and tier two stuff. Me as a developer, an engineer, or whatever, I'd much rather do the tier two stuff than the frontline stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, burnout is a huge issue. And I don't know the stats, I think, as compared to even other IT jobs, which, because you can imagine why, like
Yeah.
security, like who really talks to them until they tell you stop doing something or bad things have happened, right? It's one of those two things. And it's, a constant training or things are on fire. We'll be back with you in a minute. So it's not great. So they get a lot of, but so I actually think this new tooling and better intelligence getting in there, yeah, it may remove some of the lower level stuff, but the day-to-day job will get better. And
Yeah.
so hopefully that'll alleviate some of the burnout.
So, yeah, in terms of, as we wrap up here, any
Yeah.
parting advice for corporations and for consumers?
Yeah, I think for corporations, I've sort of already said it, but it's take a step back, think about how you think about security. Which side of the line are you on? If you really think you can get away with, more of the compliance checkbox, now we have our cyber insurance, and their payout. That's fine. But if you're in this other side of the world where you just can't. I mean,
Yeah.
we have a partner user who has many trillions of dollars under management, and if they go down, financial markets go down.
Yeah.
So they're very much on the other side of the continuum, which is re-examine things from first principles and figure out why do you have 50, 70, 100 security systems, and can you move towards a data centric solution that'll give you that faster loop. And then for the rest of us, it's just build new habits,
Yeah.
I think, and it's a pain, but eventually they become habits, and so how to protect yourself. Have it's all the stuff. I think you've covered. I have a safety, not a safety word, but a word, with my daughter, so that and a little phrase, so um, that when she calls and says, "I need money wired immediately," is it really her? So those sorts of things. And again, one takeaway is you protect yourself, but you also stop yourself from being a platform for other attacks. And
Yeah.
kind of collectively, we will increase the cost of attack and push back on. I mean, frankly, there's forces at work here that A, want to make money, but B, they don't want an open digital society to flourish
Yeah.
in our part of the world. And so, and yeah, those multi-factor authentication things, and not using the same password everything, and in a small way we're doing our part to protect this society that we just take for granted.
Awesome. And if people want to learn more about you and Deep Tempo, where could they find each of you?
Yeah, Deep Tempo is just deeptempo.ai, and take a look. We do have a lot of resources if you're interested in kind of geeking out on how these sorts of systems are built, and otherwise. And yeah, I'm just Powell 101 all over the place. You can find me on mostly on LinkedIn these days, but really appreciate the opportunity. And as I said off camera, if you will, what you do, because it's going to take us all kind of continuing to work together to change the game, to push back on this tide of attackers, which unfortunately seem to be winning today.
Yep. Evan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. I appreciate it.